Hi there, I'm Emma Richardson. And let me tell you, nothing prepares you for watching your parents hand the keys to your dream business, the one they promised you for years, to your younger sister like it's just another Tuesday. It wasn't just the business. It was a decade of broken promises wrapped in pretty excuses. The late nights researching, the degree I chose specifically for this purpose, the relationships I sacrificed. But the worst part? They didn't just take my future. They tried to erase my contribution entirely. You think that's bad? Wait until you hear how far they went before I finally showed them exactly who they were dealing with. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had that particular kind of tension in the air, the kind that sits heavy on your shoulders, making it hard to breathe. I stood at the entrance of my parents' lakeside home in Burlington, their sprawling Vermont estate with its pristine gardens and floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the setting sun. Everything looked perfect. The catered food, the string lights, the champagne glasses sparkling in the early evening light. Too perfect to be real. My name is Emma Richardson. I'm 29 years old and tonight was supposed to be my celebration. After years of preparation, countless business classes, and an MBA I worked myself to exhaustion for, tonight was meant to be the handover of Richardson Family Vineyards, our family's award-winning winery that my grandfather started from nothing. For years, my parents had told me it would be mine to lead one day. "You're the one with the head for business, Emma," they'd say. "When the time comes, you'll take Richardson Vineyards to the next level." I believed them. I shaped my entire life around that promise. All week, my mother had been sending those classic Caroline Richardson texts, the kind dripping with subtle control. "Wear something appropriate tomorrow, Emma. Try not to dominate the conversation. Darling, remember your sister has been feeling left out lately. Family harmony comes first." Each message felt like another stone added to the weight already pressing on my chest. I almost didn't come tonight. Almost. The celebration was in full swing as I walked in. Staff circulated with trays of our estate wines, relatives I barely saw, except at holidays offered air kisses and hollow compliments. My father Robert stood at the center of the great room, commanding attention as always, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting success and confidence. And there beside him was Olivia, my younger sister, dressed in a designer dress I'd never be able to afford on my assistant winemaker's salary, smiling like Vermont royalty. I forced a smile back, the kind that never reaches your eyes. Inside, I was unraveling. Mother spotted me from across the room. She glided over, wine glass in hand, her smile tight and voice dripping with false warmth. "Emma, darling, I was worried you wouldn't show." Her eyes flicked over my outfit with the briefest hint of disapproval. "Wouldn't miss my own celebration," I said flatly. She leaned in, voice low but sharp like the pruning shears we used in the vineyard. "You always make things so difficult. Can't you for once just be happy for your sister? This is about family." Family. That word was their weapon of choice. I nodded politely, excusing myself as she disappeared back into the crowd. Every step I took across that polished hardwood floor felt heavier, like I was walking toward something inevitable. As I made small talk with distant cousins and industry connections my father had invited, I caught Olivia's glance more than once. Smile playing on her lips that seemed to know something I didn't. I should have seen it coming. An hour into the evening, the music softened, and my father tapped his wine glass with a silver spoon. The crowd fell quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice warm and practiced from years of business negotiations. "Thank you all for coming tonight to celebrate with the Richardson family. As many of you know, our vineyard has been our pride and joy for 3 generations." He paused, his smile widening as he looked around the room. "Family businesses are special. They're about legacy, about passing down not just assets but values, tradition, and vision to the next generation. I glanced toward Marcus, our vineyard's financial advisor who stood near the back doors, already frowning slightly. My stomach tightened. Robert continued, raising his glass. Tonight marks a new chapter for Richardson Vineyards. After careful consideration about the future of our business, Caroline and I have made an important decision. The room seemed to hold its breath. Or maybe it was just me, suddenly unable to draw air into my lungs. We're officially announcing that Olivia will be taking over as CEO of Richardson Vineyards, effective immediately. The room erupted in applause. Someone whistled. Glasses clinked in celebration. I stood frozen, blood draining from my face as my father continued. Olivia's fresh perspective and innovative ideas are exactly what we need to take our vineyard into the modern era. I glanced at my sister, who gave me a practiced look of surprise. That didn't quite mask her satisfaction. My mother stepped up beside her, hand on her arm, beaming with pride. "It's what's best for the family business," Caroline whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "You'll understand one day." I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up, the practiced words of protest dying before they could form. The room blurred around me, guests clapping, nodding, smiling like this was the most natural thing in the world, like I wasn't standing there hollowed out, watching my future handed away like a party favor. Years of education specifically chosen. For this role, countless hours in the vineyards learning every aspect of the business, soil samples I'd analyzed, new sustainable growing techniques I'd researched and implemented, all erased in that moment. When the applause faded, conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. My parents beamed. Olivia accepted congratulations with practiced humility, and I stood there, invisible in the crowd of my own celebration-turned-nightmare. Across the room, Marcus caught my gaze and subtly shook his head, as if to say, "Don't react now. They want a scene." I swallowed the lump in my throat, fists clenched at my sides. They thought this was over. They thought they'd humiliated me enough to keep me quiet and compliant. But if they thought I would stay silent after tonight, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The Richardson family was about to learn that some promises should never be broken, and some daughters should never be underestimated. The echo of congratulations and clinking glasses stayed with me long after I left my parents' lakeside home. The night air had cooled, but the heat simmering in my chest burned hotter than ever. I drove home on autopilot, Vermont's winding roads and dense forests blurring past me like streaks of regret. By the time I reached my small cottage on the edge of the vineyard property, the same cottage my grandfather had lived in when he first started the business, the weight of the night finally hit me. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The moonlight filtering through the windows was enough to remind me that even this space probably wouldn't be mine for much longer. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and sat motionless on my couch, staring at the framed photograph. On my wall, me and Grandpa James standing among the vines, his weathered hand on my shoulder, pride evident in his eyes. "You'll carry on what I started," he'd told me that day. "You have the Richardson vision." My phone buzzed relentlessly on the coffee table. Another text from my mother. "You really should have stayed longer tonight. It's about family, Emma. Family." That word had been weaponized so many times in my life, it had lost all meaning. I scrolled back through her earlier messages, the ones she'd sent in the days leading up to tonight. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Try not to embarrass us. Your sister deserves to shine too." The words blurred together, but the message was clear. Sit down, smile pretty, and let them take whatever they want. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the vineyard ledgers and business plans I'd meticulously prepared over the years. The sustainable farming initiative I'd developed, the expansion proposal for our tasting room, the marketing rebrand I'd researched for months. All of it was mine, the product of my education, my passion, my dedication to my grandfather's legacy. And yet tonight, they decided it wasn't. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I finally dragged myself to bed, but sleep never came. Instead, I lay awake replaying every conversation, every promise my parents had made, every knowing glance between them and Olivia. By morning, exhaustion hadn't left me. It had simply calcified into something sharper: resolve. At exactly 7:43 a.m., an email notification flashed across my phone screen. Subject: Need to speak with you. Urgent. Sender: Marcus Whitfield. A tight knot formed in my stomach. I got ready, pulling my hair back into a neat ponytail, and drove to the vineyard office. The morning fog still clung to the vines, shrouding the rolling hills in a ghostly white blanket. The Richardson family vineyard sign at the entrance, hand-carved by my grandfather 40 years ago, seemed to mock me as I drove past. The administrative building was quiet this early, most of the staff not due in for another hour. Marcus was already waiting in his office when I arrived, standing by the window overlooking the East Vineyard, arms folded, a manila folder resting on the edge of his desk. "You look terrible," he said without looking at me. "Good morning to you too," I muttered, shutting the door behind me. He finally met my eyes. "You need to see this." He slid the folder across the desk. I flipped it open and the numbers stared back at me. Cold, indisputable, unauthorized transfers, unexplained expenditures, thousands upon thousands in marketing expenses that didn't match any campaigns we'd actually run. Marcus's voice was low but precise. "I ran a preliminary audit. This is just from the last fiscal year. Over $300,000 in personal expenses, all funneled through the vineyard's accounts." I flipped through the pages: designer clothing purchases, a European vacation, a new luxury car, spa retreats, all disguised as business expenses and vineyard improvements, all tied to Olivia's name. "Are you kidding me?" I whispered, anger rising in my throat. "It's systematic," Marcus said quietly. "She's been draining vineyard funds for years, and guess who approved most of these expenses?" I didn't need to ask. My father's signature was stamped across nearly every page. I leaned, back in the chair, heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about the CEO position anymore. It never was. "This isn't negligence," I said finally. "This is theft." Marcus nodded once. "You need to decide." "Decide what?" "How far you're willing to go." I sat in silence, flipping through each damning page. 3 years' worth of betrayal staring back at me in black and white. The irony wasn't lost on me. How they'd stood in front of friends and family last night preaching about legacy and tradition while bleeding the vineyard dry behind closed doors. I closed the folder slowly, my fingers tightening around its edge. "They made this personal," I said, voice calm but cold. "So I'm going to make it professional." I glanced up at Marcus. "Get me everything you can. Every transaction, every signature. We're not letting this go." His eyes narrowed slightly. Then, he gave a small nod. "Understood." As he left the room, I looked out the window at the vineyard stretching toward the distant green mountains. The same view my grandfather had loved. The same land he had trusted my father to protect. The same legacy they were destroying. If they thought this was over, they were about to learn how wrong they were. A week crawled by after Marcus's discovery, each day heavier than the last. I went through the motions, tending to the vines, checking fermentation levels, conducting tastings for visitors, while inside, something sharp twisted deeper every hour. I maintained a careful facade. I nodded politely when I passed my sister, in the barrel room. I answered my mother's texts with brief, non-committal replies. I attended the weekly staff meeting where Olivia presented her vision for the vineyard's future. A vision that involved selling off our award-winning Cabernet Franc vines to make room for a wedding venue and experiential tasting packages. All signed. The while, Marcus and I worked silently, methodically, gathering evidence, building our case, preparing for the moment when everything would change. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when the knock came at my cottage door. Soft, hesitant, like bad news dressed up in perfume. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, there she stood. Caroline Richardson, the woman who gave me life and spent most of it molding me into what she wanted, only to cast me aside when it mattered most. "Hi, sweetheart," she said sweetly, as if she hadn't publicly humiliated me just days ago. The polite smile on her lips didn't reach her eyes. That's how I knew this wasn't a social visit. I stepped aside without a word, letting her in. She moved with practiced grace, heels clicking against my hardwood floors like a ticking clock. Caroline didn't waste time. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it onto my kitchen counter. "It's just a formality," she said lightly, almost breezy. "Something the lawyers need you to sign." I didn't touch it. "What is it?" She tilted her head, voice syrup sweet. "Nothing to worry about, darling. Just housekeeping. You know how these succession things are." My stomach sank. When my mother played sweet, it meant she had a knife behind her back. I opened the folder. My eyes skimmed the header first. Release of management interest and future claims. And then, in clean, cold legal language, the content spelled it out. I was being asked to formally renounce any current or future claim to leadership positions within Richardson Vineyards, acknowledge Olivia's appointment as appropriate and final, and waive any right to contest company decisions. My name was there at the bottom, a signature line waiting for me, as if this betrayal needed my permission to be complete. I looked up slowly. "This is why you came here?" My voice felt like broken glass in my throat. Caroline's smile didn't falter. "You know how these things work, Emma. It's better for the vineyard's image if there's unified family support. Olivia will represent the brand better with her social connections and fresh approach." She reached out, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. "I know you don't like surprises, but this is what's best for all of us." All of us. I swallowed the bitter taste rising in my mouth. "Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to sign away my future." Caroline's face softened into mock concern. "It's just paperwork, sweetheart. You'll still have your role in production. You'll understand one day when you have your own family." Her words landed like a slap. Something cracked inside me then. Not a break, but a clean, sharp snap of realization. Set the folder back on the counter without looking at it. "You know," I said, voice steady, "I used to believe you when you said family takes care of its own." Her smile twitched. "Well, of course. But it's always been me, hasn't it?" I cut in. I gave up everything. My time, my weekends, relationships, opportunities abroad. So Olivia could party through college while you two pretended we were this perfect family business. Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly, the sweetness evaporating. "This isn't about you, Emma," she said coldly. "It's about what's best for Richardson Vineyards." There it was, the real voice behind the smile. I took a breath, gathering every ounce of the steel I'd spent years building. "No," I said firmly. "It's about control, and I'm done handing mine over." "Think carefully, Emma. Family comes first." I met her gaze head on. "Not when family treats you like you're disposable." The silence between us was louder than any argument. Caroline stood there a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she slipped her handbag back over her shoulder and walked to the door. I didn't move until I heard it click shut behind her. Only then did I lean against the counter, my chest tight, hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of every unspoken battle finally coming to the surface. They thought they could push me to my breaking point. They didn't know how far I was willing to go. The door had barely closed behind my mother when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I spent the rest of that evening doing what I'd trained myself to do over years in the vineyard, methodically planning, organizing, preparing. I pulled out my laptop and began documenting everything. Every promise made about my future role, every conversation about succession planning, every unusual expense I'd noticed over the years. I organized the information Marcus had given me, creating a timeline of financial misconduct. For days after, I kept my head down at the vineyard, making sure no one could see the storm brewing beneath my skin. My parents wanted me out of the picture quietly, and I knew better than to give them a reason to accelerate their plans. But I didn't have to wait long. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. I was at my desk in the production office, reviewing harvest projections, when my inbox pinged with a new message. Subject: Richardson Vineyards restructuring, effective immediately. The sender wasn't Marcus. It wasn't even our HR manager. It was my father. The blood drained from my face before I even clicked to open it. When I did, the words punched me in the stomach. Proposal: effective immediately. Richardson Vineyards recommends a restructuring of production leadership. Emma Richardson to step down as head of production and assume the role of assistant winemaker. Olivia Richardson to appoint a new head of production of her choosing. Beneath it, an additional note in my father's handwriting, scanned and attached. Emma has become increasingly resistant to innovation and unable to adapt to market changes. For the good of the vineyard and the family's image, a leadership shift in production is necessary. I couldn't breathe. The very man who had taught me everything I knew about winemaking, who had once proudly introduced me to industry colleagues as the future of Richardson Vineyards, was now writing me off like a liability. Without thinking, I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring. "I was about to call you," I said, my voice tight. "You saw it?" He sighed heavily. "And there's more. We need to talk." Within half an hour, we were sitting in his car parked at the far edge of the property where the vineyard met the forest. Marcus handed me another folder. "I ran deeper checks," he said quietly, "because something about all this felt wrong." I flipped the folder open and scanned the documents inside. It didn't take long before the numbers jumped out at me. Vineyard, assets, equipment purchases, a land parcel adjacent to our property, all mortgaged without board approval. A private loan attached to those mortgages, nearly $1.2 million. For what? I asked, throat dry. For Olivia, Marcus replied grimly. A new venture in hospitality. Your parents signed off on everything and they forged your signature on the board. Documents to push it through. As head of production, you should have been consulted. I leaned back in my seat, the weight of it all crashing down on me like a collapsing trellis. It wasn't just my position. It wasn't just my demotion. They were dismantling everything my grandfather had built, risking our entire operation and using my name to do it. I stared at the mortgage documents in my hands, my vision blurring around the edges. They didn't just want to push me aside, I said quietly. They're risking everything my grandfather built. Marcus nodded grimly. The vineyard's equity is being leveraged for some hospitality venture Olivia wants to launch. A luxury retreat or something. The business plan is flimsy at best. I flipped through page after page of financial maneuvering, each signature, my forged signature, like a knife twisting deeper. This isn't just about succession anymore, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. This is fraud. I know. Marcus looked out at the vineyard, rows of carefully tended vines stretching toward the mountains. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I stared down at the documents, then at my grandfather's cottage visible through the trees. I thought about him, how he'd worked this land with his own hands, how he'd built something from nothing, how he'd trusted that I would be the one to carry it forward. "I'm going to fight," I said simply. "Not just for my position, but for the vineyard itself." I spent the next several hours in Marcus's office, gathering everything: emails, financial statements, internal memos, the paper trail they thought I'd never find. Every signature, every unauthorized transfer, every cent funneled where it shouldn't have been. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the vineyard. I sat at my desk, staring at the mountain of evidence, the sickening reality of what my own family had done. Then I opened a new email to our board of directors, most of whom were old friends of my grandfather, people who had watched me grow up among these vines. Subject: Emergency Board Meeting Request. Financial irregularities and executive misconduct. My fingers hovered over the keyboard one last moment before I hit send. They thought they had silenced me. I was about to prove them wrong. The email to the board had barely left my outbox when I turned my focus to the next battlefront. I wasn't naive enough to believe the documents alone would be enough. I needed every loose thread tied, every name revealed. By Tuesday morning, I was back at my desk in the production office, scanning through the demotion notice more carefully. Something caught my eye: specific legal phrasing about succession planning that seemed oddly formal, too polished for my father's usual communication style. I recognized it because I'd seen similar language before in contracts drafted by Lisa Mendez, our family's longtime attorney and my mother's college friend, the same woman who had helped my grandfather set up the original succession plan, the one that was supposed to make me CEO. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Lisa had known. She'd helped them rewrite everything. By late afternoon, I couldn't shake the suspicion. I drove to Lisa's office in Burlington, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Her assistant tried to stop me, but I walked past her desk with purpose. Lisa looked up, startled when I pushed open her office door without knocking. "Emma, what a surprise." Her smile faltered at the edges. I closed the door behind me and dropped the succession documents on her desk. "Let's skip the small talk," I said quietly. "You drafted this." Lisa glanced at the papers, her expression carefully neutral. "I oversee all corporate documents for Richardson Vineyards." "This isn't just any document," I replied, my voice level despite the anger burning in my chest. "This is the rewrite of my grandfather's succession plan, the one you helped him create, the one that named me as his successor." For a moment, I saw something flicker in her eyes: discomfort, maybe even guilt. But it vanished quickly. "Business succession is complex. Emma," she said evenly, "your parents made a business decision about what was best for the vineyard's future. Don't." My voice was sharp now. "Don't pretend this was just business. You helped them forge my signature on loan documents. You helped them mortgage Vineyard. Assets without board approval." Her face paled slightly. She hadn't expected me to know that. "Your parents asked me to secure the vineyard's future," she said carefully. "Olivia's retreat concept will diversify." "You know my grandfather's wishes," I cut in. "You were there when he made them clear. You were his friend." Lisa leaned back in her chair, something like pity crossing her face. "James is gone, Emma. The business moves forward. Your parents are the majority shareholders now." I stood there for a long moment, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me. Finally, I spoke, my voice quiet but firm. "You made your choice, Lisa. So will I." I walked out without another word, the click of the door behind me sounding final. That night, back in my cottage, I sat at my grandfather's old oak desk, the one where he'd taught me how to read financial statements when I was just 12. The lights were dim, the vineyard outside my window a dark silhouette against the night sky. I opened my laptop and typed the words I never thought I'd send to my own family. To Robert Richardson, Caroline Richardson, Olivia Richardson. Subject: Final notice. Any further attempt to misappropriate vineyard assets or remove me from my position will be met with full legal consequences. You've crossed every line. There won't be a next time. I read the words twice before clicking send. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was something colder, sharper, a line I knew I would never uncross. Later that night, Marcus arrived at my cottage, still in his work clothes, his sleeves rolled up like he'd barely stopped working. "You sure about this?" he asked as he sat across from me at my kitchen table. I nodded, sliding a thick folder toward him. "They've made it clear this isn't about family. It's about power and money. We went over every document, every name, every move. This wasn't going to be pretty. Exposing my family's financial misconduct would inevitably damage the vineyard's reputation, the very thing my grandfather had spent his life building. But letting them continue would destroy it completely." "The board meeting is scheduled for Friday," Marcus said, checking his phone. "Your father's trying to get it postponed." "Of course he is." I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "He knows what's coming." Marcus studied me for a moment. "You know there's no going back from this, right? Once you present this to the board." "I know." I looked out at the dark silhouettes of the vines my grandfather had planted. "But there's no going back anyway. They made sure of that." What my family didn't realize was that I had stopped playing by their rules. I wasn't the obedient daughter anymore, willing to step aside for the good of family harmony. I was my grandfather's granddaughter, stubborn, principled, and ready to fight for what was mine. It didn't take long after I sent the warning email for them to make their next move. Mid-October mornings in Vermont had a certain crispness to the air, the vineyard alive with fall colors, but that Monday the chill I felt wasn't from the weather. It came from an email forwarded to me by one of our junior sommeliers. Subject: Line. Richardson Vineyards rebranding launch. Exclusive preview event. The invitation was sleek and expensive, dripping with curated elegance. A rebranding event, they called it. But the guest list told another story. Social media influencers, lifestyle bloggers, luxury travel writers, and Boston socialites with no connection to the wine industry. And the signature at the bottom, hosted by Olivia Richardson, CEO of Richardson Vineyards and founder of Verdant Retreat. My fingers curled around the mouse as I scrolled through the details. The date was tomorrow night. The venue was our newly renovated wine cave, a project I had overseen from concept to completion. The budget was staggering, $150,000 approved under marketing and brand development. I barely had time to process when Marcus burst into my office, holding a stack of papers. "You've seen it?" he asked, shutting the door behind him. I nodded. "Just now." He dropped the expense breakdown on my desk. "Take a look. This isn't a rebranding event. It's a launch party for Olivia's retreat project. No wine industry connections, no distributors, no critics. It's all about promoting her side venture using vineyard resources." I flipped through the pages. Celebrity, chef catering, designer floral installations, gift bags containing luxury spa products. None of it related to our wines. A photographer and videographer contracted to shoot material for Verdant Retreat promotional assets. "This is theft dressed up as marketing," I muttered. Marcus crossed his arms, jaw tight. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They think you're already out." I looked up at him, something icy settling behind my eyes. "Well, they're about to find out otherwise." That night, I sat in my cottage watching Instagram stories flood in from Olivia's private account. Previews of the event setup, close-ups of the expensive floral arrangements, behind-the-scenes glimpses of gift bag assembly. Every post was branded with both Richardson Vineyards and Verdant Retreat logos, as if they were already one and the same. I didn't sleep. Instead, I drafted a detailed memo to the board documenting how vineyard resources were being misappropriated for a separate business venture without proper authorization. I attached photos, budget numbers, vendor contracts, everything necessary to show this wasn't just poor judgment, but deliberate misuse of company assets. The whispers at the vineyard the next day told me everything I needed to know. Emma's just jealous of Olivia's vision. Maybe it's time for new leadership. Emma's stuck in the past. I heard every comment in the barrel room, every conversation that stopped when I entered the lab, every smile too polite, every glance too sympathetic. By mid-morning, I'd had enough. I called Marcus to my office. "Draft me an internal memo," I said. He looked wary. "You're sure this is the right timing? The board meeting is in 2 days." "I'm sure," I nodded. "This isn't reactionary, it's necessary." Together, we outlined every point. Effective immediately, all marketing expenditures exceeding $5,000 required dual approval from both production and finance. All vendor contracts needed documentation of their direct benefit to wine sales. Any events hosted at vineyard facilities must focus primarily on Richardson wines, with detailed justification for any peripheral activities. When I finished reviewing I added one final line. Richardson Vineyards resources exist to support our winemaking legacy, not personal side ventures or lifestyle brands. The memo went out to every department head, every board member, and the entire executive team. The fallout was immediate. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Calls from confused employees, texts from my mother demanding an explanation, an email from my father insisting I retract the memo before causing irreparable damage. Olivia didn't call or text. Instead, she marched directly into my office an hour later, cheeks flushed with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, waving her phone with the memo displayed. "The event is tonight." I looked up calmly from my computer. "I'm protecting the vineyard's assets. That's my job. This is sabotage and you know it." Her voice shook slightly. "You're just upset because Dad chose me to lead." I leaned back in my chair, studying my sister, the designer clothes, the perfect manicure, the carefully cultivated image that had nothing to do with winemaking and everything to do with the lifestyle she wanted to project. "No, Olivia. I'm upset because you and our parents are bleeding this vineyard dry to fund your retreat fantasy. Tonight's event has nothing to do with our wines and everything to do with launching your personal brand," she scoffed. "It's called synergy, Emma. Something you wouldn't understand with your outdated ideas. The modern wine consumer wants experiences, not just bottles." "The modern wine consumer also expects authenticity," I replied evenly. "Something that's hard to maintain when you're busy forging documents and misappropriating funds." Her face paled slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." I stood, gathering a folder from my desk. "And so will the board at Friday's meeting." Something flickered in her eyes, a flash of uncertainty, maybe even fear. Then it hardened into cold determination. "You won't win this, Emma," she said quietly. "Mom and Dad have already decided. The board trusts them. You're just making yourself look bitter and vindictive." I smiled slightly, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. "We'll see." After she left, Marcus walked, an eyebrow raised. "That looked intense." "It was." I sighed, looking out at the vineyard, the late afternoon sun gilding the autumn leaves. "But necessary. You know they'll still hold the event tonight, right? Your memo can't stop what's already been set in motion." I nodded. "I know. But now, there's a paper trail showing I formally objected, and every board member will be watching what happens tonight with new eyes." That evening, I drove to a small overlook above the vineyard. I could see the twinkling lights in the wine cave, the steady stream of luxury cars pulling up to the entrance, camera flashes like fireflies in the gathering dusk. From this distance, it looked magical, like something from a glossy magazine spread, No one seeing it would know about the forged signatures, the misappropriated funds, the betrayal that made it possible. I sat there alone, watching as my family's legacy was used as a backdrop for my sister's ambitions. They wanted to paint me as the villain, the jealous sister, the outdated traditionalist, the obstacle to progress. Fine, I'd be the villain, because sometimes the monster isn't the one who starts the fight, it's the one who finishes it. The first thing I noticed that morning wasn't the light filtering through the autumn leaves outside my window. It was the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on my nightstand. When I finally grabbed it, the screen lit up with missed calls. 24 in total. Board members, staff, local business connections, and a barrage of text messages, all variations of the same urgent tone. Emma, have you seen what's happening? Call me ASAP. Is this true about Richardson? Vineyards? With a sinking feeling, I opened one of the links someone had sent. Headline: Family Feud Threatens Award-Winning Vineyard. Below it, a photo of Olivia and me from last year's Harvest Festival, smiling stiffly side by side among the vines. The article painted me as a jealous obstructionist, a bitter sibling who couldn't accept change or innovation, who was trying to sabotage my sister's vision for modernizing the family business. Every quote carefully framed to make me look unreasonable, every fact selectively presented. I barely had time to process when Marcus's name flashed on my screen. I answered immediately. Tell me you're seeing this, I said without preamble. He let out a breath on the other end. It's worse than you think. Olivia leaked internal emails to the press. Selectively edited, of course. She's making you look like you're sabotaging the vineyard out of spite. My stomach clenched as I sat up, the blanket falling away. How? Through Lisa Mendez, most likely. They're feeding stories to the local business journal, the regional lifestyle magazines, even the agriculture blogs. The story is everywhere. My inbox confirmed it. Dozens of messages from industry contacts, some expressing concern, others distancing themselves already. Scrolling through social media was worse. Richardson Vineyard drama, wine family, sisterly feud. Every comment seemed to take Olivia's side. Innovation is necessary for survival. Some people just can't handle change. Classic case of jealousy. A text from my mother arrived next. See what you've done to this family? I stared at the screen, fingers numb. She wasn't upset about the lies. She was upset they weren't the only ones controlling the narrative anymore. By noon, the tension at the vineyard was suffocating. Staff members I'd worked alongside for years avoided eye contact, conversations, stopped when I entered rooms, and tasting room employees huddled in corners whispering about job security and taking sides. It wasn't paranoia. This was exactly how my family operated when they felt threatened. Late that afternoon, I walked into the small lab where Eli Jenkins, our senior viticulturist, was examining soil samples. He'd been with the vineyard since my grandfather's time had taught me how to identify the subtle differences in terroir across our property. He barely looked up when I entered. Got a minute? I asked. Eli nodded stiffly, still focused on his microscope. I closed the door behind me. Let's not pretend, I said quietly. I know you've been in meetings with Olivia. Eli sighed, finally meeting my eyes. People are nervous, Emma. The vineyard's reputation is taking hits. Staff don't know who to trust or what's coming next. Leaned against the counter. Do you really believe I'd damage the vineyard out of spite? He hesitated, years of loyalty warring with current uncertainty. I don't know what to believe anymore, but Olivia's promise of expansion, new markets, the retreat bringing in wealthy clients, it's compelling. People are worried about job security. And my record of consistent quality, sustainable practices, and financial stability counts for nothing? His eyes softened slightly. You know I respect what you've done here. But this battle between you two, it's tearing the place apart. That night in my cottage, Marcus sat across from me, laptop open between us. "We have enough," he said quietly. "Everything's ready for tomorrow's board meeting." I nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming. "Once this goes public, there's no going back. They made it public," he reminded me. "Now they'll face the consequences." I spent the next 2 hours organizing the final documents, financial records, audit reports, legal assessments, every forged signature and unauthorized transaction methodically cataloged and annotated. My arsenal for tomorrow's battle. As I worked, a notification popped up on my laptop. An email from my grandfather's old friend, Walter Simmons, now the most senior member of our board. "Emma, whatever happens tomorrow, remember that your grandfather valued 3 things above all: quality, integrity, and legacy. Don't let anyone tell you different. Walt." I sat back, something warm and solid settling in my chest. At least one person still remembered what Richardson Vineyards was supposed to stand for. The boardroom had never felt so cold. It was late October, the morning crisp and bright outside, the vineyard a tapestry of red and gold autumn colors. But inside the cedar-paneled room in our main building, the air was frigid with tension. I arrived early, my files tucked under one arm, steps deliberately measured as I took my place at the long oak table, the same table where my grandfather had held board meetings for decades. The chairs slowly filled with board members, some avoiding my gaze, others watching me too carefully. Across from me sat my parents, Robert and Caroline Richardson, their expressions carefully neutral, and beside them, Olivia, scrolling through her phone as if this were just another inconvenient meeting. I didn't speak until Walter Simmons called, the meeting to order, and the door clicked shut. "Let's begin," Walter said, his voice grave. This emergency meeting was requested by Emma Richardson regarding serious concerns about financial management and corporate governance. I stood, placing the first folder in front of me. "What you're about to see is not just about succession. Disputes or differing visions for the vineyard?" I began, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "It's about breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of funds, and document forgery." I opened the folder and slid copies across the table. Audit reports, financial statements, copies of my forged signature, receipts, emails, mortgage agreements, all pointing to one inescapable conclusion. "For the past 3 years," I continued, "vineyard funds have been systematically redirected for unauthorized purposes, personal expenses disguised as marketing costs, vineyard assets mortgaged without proper approval, and my signature forged on multiple legal documents, all to finance an entirely separate business venture called Verdant Retreat." A murmur rippled through the room as pages were flipped, brows furrowed in concern or confusion. My father leaned forward, voice tightly controlled. "This is ridiculous. We can handle any concerns about resource allocation internally. There's no need for this spectacle." I met his gaze, unflinching. "You didn't hesitate to humiliate me publicly. We'll resolve this publicly as well." My mother shook her head, eyes cold. "This is family, Emma. You're destroying what your grandfather built." "No," I said evenly, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "You destroyed it the day you decided my dedication and expertise were worth less than Olivia's ambitions." Walter Simmons cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, Emma. Can you walk us through the evidence?" Of course. I remained, standing, methodically presenting each document. "First, let me show you the pattern of misappropriation." I displayed financial records showing how vineyard marketing funds had been diverted to develop Olivia's retreat concept. Over $800,000 in vineyard resources have been channeled into Verdant Retreat in the past 3 years. None of this was disclosed to the board. Board member Ellen Winters, a retired financial analyst and my grandfather's cousin, spoke up. "These expenditures weren't flagged in our quarterly reviews because they were deliberately miscategorized," I explained, showing the next set of documents. Marketing expenses, facility improvements, staff training, all legitimate-sounding expenses that were actually financing Olivia's separate business. I moved to the next exhibit. More concerning are these loan documents. The family mortgaged our North Vineyard block, our best Pinot Noir vines, to secure additional funding for Verdant Retreat. I slid forward copies of the mortgage papers. You'll notice my signature on page 3, except I never signed this document. I was never even informed of this transaction. The room grew quieter as board members examined the evidence. Robert Richardson shifted in his chair, his composure beginning to crack. "This is a gross mischaracterization," he insisted. "We were diversifying the business, creating synergy between wine tourism and luxury hospitality." "Then why forge my signature?" I asked directly. "Why not disclose these plans to the board? Why disguise these expenses in our financial reporting?" Olivia finally looked up from her phone, her voice cool and dismissive. "We knew you'd react exactly like this, clinging to outdated ideas about what the vineyard should be. Grandpa's vision was important, but markets change. Richardson Vineyards needs to evolve." "Don't you dare invoke his name," I said, my voice low but intense. "Grandpa built this vineyard on quality and integrity, not by stealing and lying." Caroline Richardson's face flushed with anger. "That's enough, Emma. This theatrical performance doesn't change the fact that Robert and I are majority shareholders. The board serves at our discretion." Walter Simmons sat forward, his weathered hands folded on the table. "Actually, Caroline, that's not entirely accurate. James's trust structure gives this board independent authority over certain matters, including financial oversight and response to potential misconduct." My mother's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected that. Walter continued, "I think we need to hear the rest of Emma's evidence. For the next 40 minutes, I methodically presented everything. Emails showing my parents knew the transactions weren't authorized, doctored reports presented to the board, detailed accounting of how vineyard resources had been diverted. I finished by playing an audio recording, my grandfather's voice, thin but determined, from shortly before his death. "The vineyard goes to Emma. She understands what I've built here. She'll honor it. Get it in writing, Walter." Walter's voice responded, "It's all arranged, James. Emma will lead Richardson Vineyards when the time comes. I promise you." Silence fell over the room. My father's face had gone pale. Olivia stared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. "Ellen Winters," broke the silence, "I believe we've seen enough to warrant a formal investigation. I move that we suspend current management decisions pending an independent audit." Walter nodded. "I second the motion." "This is ridiculous," my father sputtered. "You can't possibly—" "Actually, we can," said Walter quietly. "As trustees of James Richardson's legacy, we not only can, we must." The vote was called. One by one, hands raised around the table, in favor of freezing all transactions related to Verdant Retreat, in favor of an independent financial audit, in favor of temporarily removing Olivia from the CEO position pending investigation results. Each vote felt like vindication, like a weight lifting from my shoulders. When the final hand went up, the room fell into stunned silence. My father looked, somehow diminished, slumped in his chair. My mother's face was a mask of cold fury. Olivia pushed her chair back abruptly and stood. "This is a mistake," she hissed. "You'll regret this." She didn't wait for a response, just stormed out, leaving only the echo of her footsteps behind. My parents followed shortly after, my mother pausing just long enough to give me a look that could have cut glass. The boardroom emptied gradually. Walter stayed behind, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder as he passed. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly, and then he too was gone. I remained seated, staring at the scattered papers in front of me. I had won the battle, but the vineyard and my family would never be the same. 3 months passed after the board meeting. Winter descended on the vineyard, the vines dormant under blankets of snow, the world outside still and quiet. The vineyard itself had undergone its own period of dormancy and restructuring. The full audit had revealed even more extensive financial misconduct than I'd initially discovered. The board had voted unanimously to install me as CEO, with Marcus promoted to CFO to ensure financial oversight remained stringent. Olivia had left Vermont entirely. Last I heard, she'd moved to California, attempting to launch a scaled-down version of her retreat concept with investors who knew nothing of what had happened here. My parents had retreated to their winter home in Florida, communication between us reduced to formal emails regarding their shareholder status. The family law firm had negotiated a settlement that allowed them to maintain their ownership shares but removed them from operational decisions. The vineyard had survived, but the family had fractured in ways that might never heal. It was a cold, January morning when I stood in the center of the wine cave, the space Olivia had used for her launch party, now restored to its original purpose as our premium wine storage and tasting room. The renovation was complete, erasing the last physical traces of the conflict that had torn through this place. I ran my hand along the cool stone wall, feeling the dampness that created the perfect environment for aging our best vintages. This was what my grandfather had built, not a glamorous backdrop for Instagram influencers, but a place dedicated to the patient craft of winemaking. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned to see Walter approaching, bundled against the winter cold. "It's looking good in here," he said, glancing around appreciatively. "James would approve." I nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in my throat whenever my grandfather was mentioned. "I hope so." Walter studied me for a moment. "You know, he expected this would happen someday." "What do you mean?" "The conflict, the attempt to push you aside." Walter sighed, his breath visible in the cool air. "Your parents never really understood what this place was about. Even when James was alive, they saw it as a status symbol, not a calling." I hadn't known that. I'd always assumed the divide had formed after my grandfather's death. "Why didn't he tell me?" Walter smiled sadly. "He wanted to protect you, and he believed in you, believed you'd fight when the time came." We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the barrels of aging wine, vintages that would reach their potential long after this painful chapter had faded into memory. "What happens now?" I asked finally. Walter looked at me, his eyes kind but clear. "Now you build something that's truly yours, not just preserving what James created, but making your own mark." Spring came to the vineyard with its familiar rhythm, the first tiny buds breaking on the vines, the soil warming under lengthening days, the busy preparations for the growing season ahead. Nature didn't care about human dramas. It simply continued, its ancient cycle of renewal. I found comfort in that predictability as I walked the rows early one April morning, clipboard in hand, checking the progress of each block. The previous year's harvest, the last one before the family implosion, had been exceptional, and the wines were developing beautifully in the cellar. At least some things had survived the storm intact. The business was recovering too. When news of the board's findings became public, there had been a brief media frenzy. Family feud at award-winning vineyard ends an audit. Richardson daughter reclaims CEO role after financial misconduct exposed. Industry insiders had buzzed with gossip for weeks. But then something unexpected happened. Support poured in from places I hadn't anticipated. Other family-owned wineries, local farmers, customers who'd been coming to our tasting room for decades. They sent letters, emails, even handwritten notes expressing their respect for what my grandfather had built, and their hope that I would continue his legacy of quality and integrity. I kept every message in a folder in my office, reading them. On difficult days when the emptiness of family holidays or the strain of rebuilding felt overwhelming. Professionally, things were stabilizing. I'd assembled a new management team, promoted from within where possible, bringing in fresh talent where needed. Marcus continued as CFO, implementing transparent financial systems that made misappropriation impossible. We'd launched a small, but significant rebrand, not the glamorous overhaul Olivia had envisioned, but a thoughtful evolution that honored our history while looking forward. The spring wine release had sold out within days, critics praising not just the quality, but the authentic vision behind the wines. Richardson Vineyards was finding its footing again, but personally, the landscape remained barren. My parents had returned to Vermont with the spring but maintained their distance. They attended mandatory shareholder meetings with cold formality, speaking only when necessary, leaving immediately afterward. They sold their lakeside estate and bought a smaller home across town, as if trying to maintain physical distance to match the emotional chasm between us. Olivia remained in California. She'd launched a scaled-down version of her retreat, funded by investors who knew nothing of what had happened in Vermont. According to social media, she was thriving in her new chapter, though Walter's industry connections suggested her business was struggling to find its market. I hadn't spoken directly to any of them in months. The family lawyers handled necessary communications about dividends and financial reports. Holidays passed unmarked, birthdays unacknowledged. The silence was both a relief and a wound that refused to heal. It was a warm Saturday in May when I found myself alone in the original stone cellar beneath the main house. This was where my grandfather had made his first wines, where he'd taught me to listen to what each barrel was telling me, to respect the living process happening inside the oak. I was checking the development of a special reserve Cabernet Franc, my grandfather's favorite varietal, when I heard footsteps on the stone stairs. Expecting Marcus or one of the cellar hands, I didn't look up until a familiar voice broke the silence. "It smells the same." After all these years, I turned slowly. Caroline Richardson stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking smaller somehow, less formidable than I remembered. She wore a simple blue dress instead of her usual designer outfits, her hair showing more gray than the last time I'd seen her. I set down my wine thief and tasting glass carefully. "Mom, I wasn't expecting you. I wasn't planning to come." Her voice sounded strained, uncertain. "Robert doesn't know I'm here." An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sound of the ventilation system and the subtle breathing of wine in barrels all around us. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. She moved further into the cellar, running her fingers lightly over a barrel head. "I drove past the vineyard yesterday. The vines look good this year." I waited, knowing there had to be more. The wine writer from the Boston Globe, the one who's been coming here for 30 years, he wrote that article. "Last week." She paused. "About how you've preserved your grandfather's approach while moving forward. He said the wines have never been better." I nodded. The review had been a significant endorsement, especially after the turbulence of the past year. "Your grandfather would have been proud of that," she said quietly. The statement hung in the air between us, loaded with unspoken history. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, not unkindly. Just tired of the decades of indirect communication. She looked directly at me then, something vulnerable in her eyes that I'd rarely seen. "I don't know how to fix this, Emma." I leaned against the barrel beside me, feeling the cool wood against my palm. "I'm not sure it can be fixed. Some things once broken stay broken." "Perhaps?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring absently. "But I thought I should at least try to understand." "Understand what?" "Why this place means so much to you. Why you couldn't just—" She trailed off. "Let it go?" I finished, for her. "Step aside for Olivia's vision? Pretend it didn't matter when you broke every promise made to me?" She flinched slightly at the directness, but didn't deny it. "Yes." I looked around the cellar, at the bottles laid down by my grandfather, decades ago, at the legacy that had shaped my entire life. This isn't just a business to me. It's not a status symbol or a stepping stone to something else. It's a responsibility, a covenant. With your grandfather, she said, not quite a question. With the land, I corrected her. With the people who work here. With the customers who trust us to make something authentic and meaningful. Grandpa understood that. He tried to teach all of us, but I was the only one who listened. Caroline was quiet for a long moment. I always thought your attachment was sentimental, impractical. It's the opposite, I said. It's deeply practical. Quality and integrity are the only sustainable business model in winemaking. Everything else is just marketing. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. Your father and we made mistakes. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Caroline Richardson, it was unprecedented. Yes, I agreed. You did. Another silence fell between us, not as tense as before, but heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. I should go, she said finally. Robert will be wondering where I am. I nodded, unsure what else to say. As she turned to leave, I spoke again, surprising myself. The new vintage release is next weekend, if you wanted to come. I kept my voice neutral. Both of you. She paused on the stairs, turning back with an unreadable expression. I'll think about it. After she left, I remained in the cellar for a long time, listening to the quiet murmur of aging wine, thinking about family and legacy and the complicated ways they intertwine. I didn't know if my mother would come to the release event. I didn't know if any kind of relationship with my parents could ever be rebuilt. But for the first time in months, the possibility existed, a tiny green shoot pushing through seemingly barren ground. That evening, I sat on the porch of my grandfather's cottage, my home now in every sense, watching the sunset paint the vineyard. In gold and purple. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Final label approval came through. We're all set for the release. I smiled, thinking of the special wine we'd been working on, a limited edition in my grandfather's honor, using techniques he had pioneered, grapes from the oldest vines he had planted. We'd named it Covenant. Not everything broken could be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep, some wounds would always leave scars. But the vineyard itself, the living, growing thing that connected past and future, continued its cycle of renewal. And in that, there was a kind of healing that went beyond human drama. I had fought for this place not just because it was promised to me, but because I understood what it truly was, not a possession to be handed over like a birthday gift, but a trust to be honored, protected, and eventually passed on. My parents and sister had never understood that. Perhaps they never would. But the vineyard understood. The vines knew who had tended them with love and respect. The wine remembered the hands that had crafted it with patience and care. And in the end, that was enough. 1 year had passed since the board meeting that changed everything. The vineyard had completed a full cycle: dormancy, bud break, flowering, veraison, harvest, and back to winter rest. Nature's rhythm had continued, indifferent to human dramas, but quietly healing in its constancy. I stood at the edge of the east, vineyard on a crisp October morning, watching the harvest crew carefully selecting clusters of Pinot Noir, the same crew that had worked with my grandfather for decades. The subtle fog was lifting as the sun warmed the hillside, revealing rows of vines heavy with fruit, their leaves turning russet and gold. The lab results look perfect, Marcus said, approaching with clipboard in hand. Sugar levels are exactly where we want them. The sample pressing yesterday was beautiful, bright fruit, perfect acidity. I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Grandpa always said this block was magic in a good year. And this is a very good year, Marcus agreed, looking out over the vineyard. It had been, in more ways than one. Richardson Vineyards had not just Recovered from the financial and public relations damage of the previous year, it had thrived. Our wines had received their highest scores ever from major critics. The tasting room had been fully booked every weekend. The sustainable farming initiatives I'd implemented were drawing attention from throughout the industry. But the greatest triumph came 3 months ago, when our reserve Cabernet Franc, the special Covenant bottling honoring my grandfather, won Best in Show at the International Wine Competition, the same competition where, 30 years earlier, my grandfather had won his first major award. The publicity had been overwhelming, but this time it was the kind we wanted. Stories about legacy and authenticity, about honoring tradition while embracing responsible innovation, about a third-generation winemaker continuing her grandfather's vision against all odds. Richardson Vineyards was no longer defined by family scandal, but by the quality of its wines and the integrity of its practices. My personal life had seen quieter transformations. My parents had come to the vintage release event I'd invited them to last spring. The reunion had been awkward, conversations stilted, but they had come. Since then, we'd established a careful, limited relationship. Holiday dinners, occasional vineyard visits, conversations that stayed safely in the present rather than revisiting past wounds. My father remained somewhat distant, still struggling to accept how completely his plans had unraveled. My mother, surprisingly, had made more effort to understand my connection to the vineyard. She'd even asked me to show her the production process from beginning to end, something she'd never expressed. Interest in before Olivia and I remained estranged. Her retreat venture in California had failed within 6 months, investors pulling out when projected returns didn't materialize. According to my mother, she'd moved to New York and taken a marketing position with a luxury goods company. We hadn't spoken directly since the board meeting. Some rifts I'd come to accept might never fully heal. But I'd found peace with that reality. The Covenant wine sold out completely, Marcus said, interrupting my thoughts. Every bottle. We could have sold 3 times the production. I smiled. We'll make more next year, but not too much more. It needs to stay special. He nodded, understanding. Marcus had become more than my CFO over the past year. He'd become my partner in every sense. Our shared commitment to the vineyard had gradually evolved into something deeper, a relationship, built on mutual respect and shared values. The board meeting is at 2, he reminded me gently. Walter wants to discuss the expansion proposal. The expansion. After careful consideration, we developed a plan to purchase an adjacent property, 20 acres of ideal south-facing slopes. Not for a retreat or event space, but to expand our premium grape production, focusing on the heritage clones my grandfather had championed decades before. I'll be there, I promised, taking one last look at the harvest in progress before turning back toward the main building. As I walked through the rows, greeting workers by name, I felt a sense of rightness that had been missing for so long. This was where I belonged. This was what I had fought for. Not just a title or position, but the chance to continue something meaningful. The board meeting that afternoon was unlike any I could have imagined 2 years earlier. Gone were the tension and hostility, replaced by collaborative energy and shared purpose. Walter Simmons, now officially board chairman, guided the discussion with wisdom born from decades in the industry. The expansion proposal makes sense, Ellen Winters said, reviewing the financial projections. It's ambitious but sound. The heritage focus aligns perfectly with our brand identity. The other board members nodded in agreement. Even my father, who had eventually returned to a non-executive board role, offered quiet support. James would have approved, Walter said when the unanimous vote was complete. He always said the right land was worth waiting for, worth fighting for. As the meeting concluded, board members filtered out, conversations continuing about harvest progress and the upcoming winter work. My father lingered, awkwardly straightening his papers. The wines this year, he said finally, not quite meeting my eyes. They're exceptional. From him, this simple acknowledgement felt significant. "Thank you," I replied. "We had perfect growing conditions." He nodded, hesitating as if wanting to say more, then simply gathered his things and left. Some conversations, I'd learned, happened in small increments over long periods of time. Some acknowledgments came indirectly, in the spaces between words. That evening, I hosted a harvest dinner for the vineyard crew in the old barn we'd converted to an event space. Not the glossy Instagram-ready venue Olivia had envisioned, but a warm, authentic space that honored the agricultural heritage of what we did. Long tables filled with vineyard workers, cellar staff, tasting room employees, and their families. Platters of locally grown food circulated alongside bottles of our wine. Children played between the tables while their parents relaxed after weeks of intense harvest work. I stood to offer a toast, looking out at the gathering. These people, who had stood by the vineyard through its darkest days, who had trusted me to lead even when my own family hadn't. "To the harvest," I said, raising my glass. "To the land that sustains us. To the legacy we continue together." "To Emma," Walter called from his seat, raising his glass higher, "who fought for what matters." The room echoed with agreement, glasses raising, faces warm with genuine affection and respect. In that moment, I understood something my grandfather had tried to tell me years before: that true legacy isn't what's handed to you, but what you build and protect through your own efforts. Later, after the dinner had ended and the last guest departed, I walked alone to my grandfather's cottage, my home now. The full moon illuminated the vineyard, casting silver light across the recently harvested vines. In the distance, the lights of the production building glowed softly where the late crew was processing the day's fruit, turning what the land had provided into something that would outlast us all. I thought about the journey of the past 2 years, the betrayal, the fight, the rebuilding. I thought about what had been lost and what had been gained. My parents had tried to give what was rightfully mine to my sister, treating my inheritance like a birthday gift they could reassign at will. In doing so, they had revealed truths about themselves, about our family, about what really mattered to each of us. Their decision had shocked me, hurt me, nearly broken me. But it had also forced me to stand up, to fight back, to become the person my grandfather had always believed I could be. And for that, strangely enough, I was grateful. 2 years to the day after that fateful birthday announcement, I stood at my grandfather's grave in the small cemetery on the eastern edge of the vineyard property. I'd brought a bottle of the Covenant wine, placing it beside the simple granite headstone that read, "James Elliott Richardson." He tended the land with wisdom and love. The autumn air was still, the vineyard spread out below in a tapestry of gold and crimson, the harvest complete, the year's work nearly done. I sat on the small stone bench beside the grave, uncorked the wine, and poured 2 glasses. One for me, one for him. "I think we did it, Grandpa," I said quietly. "The vineyard is secure. The wines are better than ever. The expansion is underway." A gentle breeze rustled the nearby maple trees, sending a shower of red leaves spiraling down around me. I took a sip of the wine, letting the complex flavors remind me of everything that had led to this moment. So much had changed in 2 years. The vineyard had not only recovered, but reached new heights. The board was united in its vision. The staff was engaged and proud of what we were creating together. Even my relationship with my parents had found a fragile new equilibrium. Not the easy closeness we'd never really had, but a cautious respect that might, with time, grow into something more substantial. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Marcus reminding me about the meeting with our new sustainable agriculture consultant. Life continued, work continued, growth continued. Before leaving, I took a small envelope from my jacket and placed it beside the wine bottle. Inside was a newspaper clipping, the announcement of our upcoming marriage, simple and understated, just as my grandfather would have preferred. Marcus and I had decided to hold the ceremony here in the vineyard next spring, when the first buds would be breaking on the vines. As I walked back toward the main buildings, I reflected on everything the past 2 years had taught me about family, about business, about myself, about the difference between what is given to you and what you earn through your own efforts. For so long, I had waited for my inheritance, the position, the authority, the vineyard itself, as something that would be bestowed upon me. I had shaped my life around a promise, working diligently but always with the expectation that what was meant for me would eventually come my way through the natural order of things. The betrayal had shattered that expectation. It had forced me to fight not just for what was promised, but for what I believed in. It had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed: resilience, strategic thinking, the courage to stand alone when necessary. Most importantly, it had transformed my relationship with the vineyard itself. What had once been my grandfather's legacy to me had become my own creation, shaped by my decisions, my vision, my unwavering commitment through the darkest days. In the strangest way, my parents' attempt to take everything from me had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I was capable of building something on my own terms, that I didn't need their approval or permission to honor what mattered most. When I reached the visitor center, a tour group was just arriving, wine enthusiasts from across the country who had reserved their spots months in advance. They fell, silent as I approached, several of them recognizing me from recent magazine features. "Welcome to Richardson Vineyards," I said warmly. "I'm Emma Richardson. We've read so much about you and what you've accomplished here," one woman said. "About how you saved your grandfather's legacy." I smiled, thinking about how incomplete that narrative really was. "The truth is a bit more complicated," I replied. "The vineyard saved me as much as I saved it." After greeting the visitors, I continued to my office to prepare for the afternoon meetings. On my desk sat a small wooden box I'd discovered in my grandfather's things after his death, but had only recently opened. Inside were his handwritten journals, decades of observations about the land, the vines, the wine, and tucked between the pages, letters he had written to me but never sent, sharing wisdom he hoped I would someday need. One passage had become something of a mantra for me in recent months. "Emma, remember that the finest wines come from vines that have struggled, when roots must reach deeper for water, when the plant must fight against the elements. The resulting fruit develops complexity and character impossible to achieve in easier conditions. The same is true of people. Don't fear the difficult seasons. They are preparing you for your best vintage." My parents had given my inheritance, my birthright, to my sister, treating it like a casual birthday gift they could reassign at will. In doing so, they had forced me into the struggle my grandfather wrote about, the difficult season that would ultimately define me. Life doesn't always give you what you deserve. Sometimes it takes away what should rightfully be yours. The measure of a person isn't found in what they're given, but in what they do when something precious is taken away. In my case, losing my inheritance had ultimately led me to claim something far more valuable: my own power, my own vision, my own unshakable sense of purpose. And for that unexpected gift, I would always be grateful. Before I end this story, let me share something I've learned through all of this, something I wish someone had told me sooner. The truth is, sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you will be the ones who hurt you most deeply. When that happens, you have two choices. You can diminish yourself to meet their expectations, or you can stand up for what you know is right, even if it means standing alone. What I learned through this journey is that family isn't defined by unconditional loyalty or blind acceptance. Real family, whether by blood or by choice, is built on respect, honesty, and the willingness to uphold boundaries when love becomes control or manipulation. I fought not just for a vineyard or a title. I fought to reclaim my voice, my worth, my right to shape my own future. In the process, I discovered strengths I never knew I had and built connections more authentic than what I'd lost. 2 weeks after my visit to my grandfather's grave, I received an unexpected letter. The return address was from New York, the handwriting, unmistakably Olivia's. For days, I left it unopened on my desk, unsure if I wanted to reopen wounds that had finally begun to heal. When I finally read it, I found not an apology exactly, but something more complicated. A recognition of how differently we'd seen the same family, the same vineyard, the same future. Of how she'd coveted what had been promised to me without understanding what it truly meant to me. I wanted the position, the title, the prestige, she wrote. But I never wanted the work, the responsibility, the commitment to the land itself. I see that now. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She simply offered acknowledgement that she had participated in something wrong, that she had hurt me, that she now understood, at least partially, why it had mattered so much. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A small green shoot pushing through what had seemed permanently barren ground. I wrote back a brief note, not promising a relationship or erasing the past, but leaving open the possibility that time might eventually create a path forward we couldn't yet imagine. So let me ask you this. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, even when it cost you everything that mattered? Have you ever had to fight for something that should have been yours by right? If this story resonated with you, if something in Emma's journey sparked recognition in your own experience, know that you're not alone. The details might be different, but the core truth remains. Your value isn't measured by what others are willing to give you. It's determined by what you refuse to give up when it matters most. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when it hurt. Tell me where you're watching from. Share what part of this story made you pause, or think differently, or feel something unexpected. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my next video, because the story never really ends. It just enters a new season, a new vintage, a new possibility. The roots grow deeper. The fruit develops character. And sometimes, the most difficult harvests produce the most extraordinary wine. During those intense weeks after discovering the financial misconduct, there was a moment I haven't told you about yet. A discovery that cut deeper than even the forged signatures and diverted funds. It happened 3 days after my meeting with Lisa Mendez, while Marcus and I were combing through years of financial records in preparation for the board meeting. We had set up a makeshift war room in his apartment, away from prying eyes at the vineyard office, with documents spread across every surface. "Emma, look at this," Marcus said, his voice unusually tight as he handed me a folder I hadn't seen before. I requested the original trust documents from the county records office. I opened the folder to find my grandfather's original succession plan, the legal document that had supposedly named me as his successor. But as I scanned the pages, confusion turned to disbelief. "This doesn't make sense," I said, flipping back to the first page. "This says the vineyard leadership is to be determined by a majority vote of the board upon my grandfather's death, with my father having temporary stewardship until the vote occurs." Marcus nodded grimly. "Keep reading." I turned to the final page, where my grandfather's signature was followed by a note in his handwriting. "My verbal promises to Emma regarding succession are not reflected in this document due to legal complications with our land trust structure. Robert and Caroline understand my wishes and have promised to honor them when the time comes." The room seemed to spin around me. "He never legally guaranteed the position to me," I whispered. "He trusted my parents to honor his wishes." "And there's more," Marcus said quietly, handing me another document. "This is the board meeting minutes from 3 months after your grandfather died." The minutes were brief, clinical. a vote had been held regarding future leadership. The board, then controlled by my parents and their allies, had unanimously agreed to honor James Richardson's wishes that Emma Richardson eventually assume leadership, following a suitable training period under Robert Richardson's guidance. They acknowledged it, I said, my voice hollow. They officially recognized his wishes. Yes, Marcus confirmed. And then they spent the next 5 years systematically preparing to break that promise. Look at the board composition changes. He showed me how, over the years following my grandfather's death, my parents had gradually replaced independent board members with friends and business associates loyal to them. They had been planning this betrayal for years, methodically creating the conditions that would allow them to hand the vineyard to Olivia instead of me. This wasn't a sudden decision or a recent change of heart. This was a long con, executed with patience and precision. All those years I'd spent working alongside my father, believing I was being groomed for leadership, he had already decided I would never have it. Why? I asked, the question directed, not at Marcus, but at the universe. Why go through the charade? Why not just tell me years ago that they had different plans? Because they needed you, Marcus said simply. Your knowledge, your work ethic, your connection to the vineyards. Look at the production records during this period. The data told a clear story. Under my management, wine quality had improved, production efficiency had increased, and our reputation among critics had soared. I had been the engine driving the vineyard's renaissance, all while my parents were planning to hand the fruits of my labor to Olivia. I sat back in my chair, a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't just business anymore. This wasn't even just family dysfunction. This was calculated betrayal spanning years. They used me, I said, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. All this time they used me. Marcus didn't offer hollow reassurances. He simply sat with me in that moment, allowing the full weight of the revelation to settle. When I finally spoke again, my voice was steady. We need to find out who else knew. Who else was part of this? The next day, I drove to a small coffee shop in Burlington, where I'd arranged to meet Eleanor Jameson, my grandfather's former assistant who had retired shortly after his death. Eleanor had always been kind to me, a grandmotherly figure who remembered birthdays and asked about my dreams. She was already seated when I arrived, her silver hair neatly styled, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Her smile faded when she saw my expression. You know, she said simply. It wasn't a question. I slid into the seat across from her. How long have you known? Eleanor sighed, setting down her mug. Since before your grandfather died. I overheard a conversation between your parents shortly after his cancer diagnosis. They were already discussing how to manage the succession situation, as they called it. And you never told me, I said, trying to keep the accusation from my voice. I told James, she replied, meeting my eyes directly. He confronted them. They denied everything, of course, promised him they would honor his wishes. That's why he added that handwritten note to the trust documents. He knew there was a risk they would betray him. I struggled to process this. Then why didn't he change the legal structure? Force their hands? The land trust complications were real, Eleanor explained. Changing the succession structure would have triggered tax implications that could have forced a partial sale of the vineyard. He couldn't risk that. She reached across the table, her weathered hand covering mine. He thought leaving that note would be enough, that they wouldn't dare go against his explicitly stated wishes, that their promise to him would hold them accountable. He trusted them too much. Or he underestimated their capacity for deception, I said quietly. Eleanor nodded sadly. After he died, I stayed on long enough to see which way the wind was blowing. When I realized they were going to break their promise, I tried to warn you, but subtly. Do you remember? I cast my mind back, trying to recall any conversations that might have contained warnings. "The day you retired," I said suddenly, "you told me to keep copies of everything, to document my contributions, to build relationships with the board independently of my parents." "Yes." She smiled faintly. "I couldn't be explicit. They had me sign a confidentiality agreement as part of my retirement package. But I tried to prepare you, in my way." We talked for another hour, Eleanor filling in gaps in my understanding, confirming suspicions, occasionally correcting misconceptions. By the time we parted, I had a clearer picture than ever of the web of deception my parents had woven around me. "What will you do now?" Eleanor asked as we stood to leave. I thought about the board meeting scheduled for the end of the week, about the evidence we had compiled, about the years of manipulation finally exposed. "What my grandfather always taught me to do," I answered. "Stand for what's true, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." Eleanor's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she hugged me goodbye. "He would be so proud of you, Emma, not just for fighting back, but for doing it with integrity." As I drove back to the vineyard, a strange lightness filled me despite the weight of everything I'd learned. The full truth, however painful, had a clarifying effect. The path forward was clearer than ever. My parents hadn't just betrayed me, once, at that birthday announcement. They had betrayed me every day for years, with every false encouragement, every pretense of grooming me for leadership, every promise they never intended to keep. This knowledge didn't weaken my resolve. It strengthened it. Because now I understood this wasn't just about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It was about exposing a pattern of deception that had corrupted my grandfather's legacy from the moment he was gone. The truth deserved to be heard, and I would make sure it was. With just 3 days remaining until the board meeting, I found myself facing a new challenge. Word had somehow leaked about my investigation, and my parents had begun a counteroffensive. Calls were being made, narratives were being shaped. I was being painted as an ungrateful daughter, unable to accept change, willing to damage the family business out of spite. That morning, I arrived at the vineyard to find Francis Weber, our head winemaker for over 20 years, waiting anxiously outside my office. Francis had been my mentor, the man who had patiently taught me every aspect of winemaking since I was a teenager. His weathered face looked unusually troubled. "Your father called an emergency staff meeting yesterday evening," he said without preamble once we were inside with the door closed. "After you'd left for the day." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" Francis ran a hand through his silver hair. "He told everyone the vineyard is facing a period of turbulence due to internal disagreements. Said there might be changes coming, that people should prepare for possible restructuring." "He's threatening their jobs," I said, understanding immediately. "Trying to turn the staff against me." Francis nodded grimly. "Not explicitly, but the message was clear. Anyone who aligns with you might find themselves on the wrong side of the coming changes." I sank into my chair, feeling the weight of this new tactic. The vineyard staff wasn't just a workforce. They were people I'd known most of my life, people whose families depended on their jobs here. My father knew exactly where to apply pressure. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. Francis hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "People are scared, Emma, confused. Most of them don't know the details of what's happening, just that there's a conflict between you and your family." "And they assume I'm the problem," I said flatly. "Some do," he admitted. "But not everyone." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "That's actually why I'm here. There are people who want to help you. People who remember your grandfather's wishes, who see what you've done for this place, who believe in your vision for the vineyard." "Who?" I asked, a small flame of hope flickering to life. "Me, for one," Francis said firmly. "I was there when James made your parents promise you would lead after Robert. I heard it with my own ears." I stared at him, stunned. "You never told me." "I thought I didn't need to," he replied simply. I thought they would honor their word. Who else? I asked. Martha in accounting. She's been tracking the financial irregularities for years, keeping her own records. She was afraid to come forward, but she's willing to now. Francis continued, counting off on his fingers. Eduardo and his vineyard team. They know you're the only Richardson who understands the land like your grandfather did. Sophia in the lab, who remembers how Olivia referred to soil testing as playing in the dirt, about half the production team. Each name he mentioned felt like a small piece of armor being fitted over my heart. They're willing to speak up? I asked, hardly daring to believe it. They're willing to sign statements, Francis confirmed, about your contributions, about things they've witnessed, about your grandfather's clear intentions. They're willing to stand with you at the board meeting if needed. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Why would they risk their jobs? For me? Francis's eyes softened. Because this isn't just your fight, Emma. It's about the soul of this vineyard. About whether we're going to be a place that values craftsmanship and integrity, or just another corporate entity focused on marketing. An image. He paused. Your grandfather built something special here, something worth protecting. These people know that. For the first time in weeks, I felt something beyond anger and determination. I felt supported, not alone. What do you need from us? Francis asked. I thought carefully before answering. Documented statements, specific examples of my contributions, of Olivia's lack of involvement in actual production, of my parents' changing behavior after my grandfather died. Anything related to financial irregularities or misuse of vineyard resources. Francis nodded. You'll have them by tomorrow. After he left, I sat at my desk, processing this unexpected development. I had been so focused on gathering financial evidence that I hadn't considered how powerful personal testimony could be. The lived experiences of people who had watched this drama unfold over years. That afternoon, a quiet revolution began. Staff members slipped into my office one by one between their regular duties, each with stories to tell, observations to share, statements to sign. Martha from accounting brought spreadsheets documenting questionable expenses dating back 3 years. Sophia from the lab had emails where Olivia dismissed quality control concerns as unnecessary perfectionism. Eduardo, our vineyard manager, had kept a journal of every significant decision about the vines for a decade, clearly showing who was actually managing the vineyard's heart. By evening, I had a new folder of evidence, not just numbers and legal documents, but human testimony about the true nature of our family business and who had really been leading it. As I was organizing these new materials, there was a soft knock at my door. I looked up to see Diane, my mother's personal assistant for the past 15 years, standing there looking nervous. Can I come in? She asked hesitantly. I nodded, surprised. Diane had always been unfailingly professional, but firmly in my mother's camp, maintaining a polite distance from me. She closed the door and sat down, hands clasped tightly in her lap. I've been debating whether to do this all day, she began, voice barely above a whisper. If your mother ever found out. Whatever you say stays between us, I promised. Diane took a deep breath. 2 years ago, I was scheduling your mother's appointments when she asked me to block off a meeting with Lisa Mendez. She told me to label it succession planning discussion in her calendar. I felt a chill. This would have been 3 years, after my grandfather's death, long before any official changes were announced. I didn't think much of it at the time, Diane continued, but afterward, your mother was unusually agitated. She asked me to copy some documents and then lock the originals in her personal safe rather than the company files. What kind of documents? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Draft agreements showing how the vineyard would be restructured for Olivia to take over. Proposed timelines. Marketing plans for the transition. Diane's eyes met mine. They were dated nearly 3 years ago, Emma. This has been in motion for a long time. I struggled to keep my expression neutral. Do you have copies of these documents? She shook her head. No, but she reached into her handbag and withdrew a small notebook. I keep records of everything I do for your mother. Dates, times, who was present at meetings, key points discussed. It's how I stay organized. She placed the notebook on my desk. I need this back before she notices it's missing, but you can photograph whatever pages you need. I leafed through the notebook, finding entries that confirmed what Eleanor had told me. This had been a carefully orchestrated plan, years in the making. Why are you showing me this? I asked quietly. Diane hesitated. I've worked for your mother for 15 years. I've typed her emails, scheduled her meetings, heard her phone calls. I know things about how this family operates that… She shook her head. Your grandfather was different. He treated everyone with respect. The vineyard workers, the office, staff, everyone. When he said something, you could trust it. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. I'm retiring next year. I've already given notice. I don't need this job badly enough to watch them erase everything your grandfather built, or everything you've contributed. After she left, I carefully photographed each relevant page of the notebook before placing it back in an envelope for her to retrieve discreetly the next morning. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table with Marcus, reviewing our now substantial body of evidence, I felt a strange, new emotion cutting through the hurt and anger. Gratitude. For every person who had chosen truth over comfort, integrity over security. I never expected this, I admitted to Marcus. I thought I was fighting this battle alone. He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. You built relationships with these people through years of working alongside them, respecting them, valuing their contributions. Your parents and Olivia never did. I nodded slowly. They saw the vineyard as an asset they owned. They never understood it's really a community. Exactly, Marcus agreed. And communities protect their own. As I went to bed that night, I realized that while my biological family had betrayed me, I had another kind of family at the vineyard, one built on shared values, mutual respect, and a common purpose. And they were standing with me. The balance had shifted. My parents had wealth, legal authority, and the power of ownership on their side. But I had something potentially more powerful. The collective voice of the people who made Richardson Vineyards what it was, day in and day out. Tomorrow, we would finalize our strategy. The day after, we would present our case to the board. And for the first time, I truly believed we could win. The evening before the board meeting held a strange, suspended quality, like the heavy stillness before a storm. I had done everything possible to prepare. The evidence was organized, the statements collected, the strategy mapped out. Now, all that remained was the waiting. I sat on my cottage porch as twilight descended over the vineyard, watching darkness slowly claim the rows of vines that stretched toward the mountains. A glass of our reserve Cabernet Franc, my grandfather's favorite, sat untouched on the small table beside me. The sound of tires on gravel broke the silence. Headlights swept across the yard as a car I didn't recognize pulled up. For a moment, I tensed, wondering if my parents had come for one last attempt at manipulation. But when the driver's door opened, it was Olivia who stepped out. My sister stood uncertainly by her car, as if debating whether to approach. In the dim porch light, she looked smaller somehow, less certain than the polished, confident woman who had accepted the CEO position, with such practiced humility. "Can we talk?" she called, making no move to come closer without invitation. I hesitated, then nodded. "Come up." She climbed the porch steps slowly, taking the chair across from me with visible reluctance. For a long moment, we sat in silence, two sisters who had grown up in the same house but somehow ended up in different worlds. "Nice car," I said finally, nodding toward the gleaming luxury SUV in my driveway. "New?" Olivia shifted uncomfortably. Company car, part of the CEO package. Ah. I let the silence stretch between us again, refusing to make this easy for her. You're really going through with it, she said at last. The board meeting tomorrow. Yes. They're saying you have evidence of financial misconduct, that you're accusing us, of fraud. Her voice held a note of disbelief, as if the very idea was absurd. I have the evidence, I confirmed, and I'll present it tomorrow. Olivia leaned forward, her expression earnest. Emma, can't we talk about this? Find some compromise before this gets even uglier? This is going to damage the vineyard's reputation, hurt our business relationships. Is that really what you want? I studied my sister's face in the fading light, trying to discern her motivation. Why are you here, Olivia? Did they send you to talk me out of it? No. She shook her head. They don't know I'm here. I came because… She paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily to her. Because I wanted to understand. Why you couldn't just accept the decision and move on. Why you'd risk everything to fight this. The question was so revealing of the gulf between us that I almost laughed. Because it was wrong, I said simply. Because Grandpa wanted me to lead this vineyard. Because I've earned it through years of work while you were building your Instagram following. Because they forged my signature and diverted company funds to fund your side project. Is that what this is about? She asked, a familiar defensiveness creeping into her tone. You're jealous of Verdant Retreat? Of my vision for expanding the business? This isn't about jealousy, I said, keeping my voice level with effort. This is about integrity, about honoring commitments, about not stealing what belongs to someone else. Olivia flinched slightly at the word stealing, but quickly recovered. The vineyard belongs to the family, Emma, and Mom and Dad decided I was better suited to lead it into the future. That's their right as majority shareholders. And the forged signatures? The misappropriated funds? The lies to the board? Were those their rights too? She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Business is complicated. Sometimes decisions have to be made quickly, without getting bogged down in bureaucracy. That's not an answer, and you know it. We fell silent again, the space between us filled with all the things we weren't saying. In the distance, an owl called, its lonely sound echoing across the darkened vineyard. Do you even want it? I asked suddenly. The vineyard. The responsibility. Do you actually care about making wine, or is it just about the status for you? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Of course I want it, she said. But there was a hesitation, a split second of uncertainty that told me everything. You want to be CEO, I clarified. You want the title, the prestige, the platform for launching your retreat concept. But do you want the actual work? The 4 a.m. frost alarms? The months of agonizing over fermentation temperatures? The years of building relationships with distributors and critics? She didn't answer immediately, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest of her chair. I have different strengths, she said finally. The vineyard needs modern marketing, social media presence, brand partnerships. Not everyone has to be like you, obsessing over soil composition and barrel selection. But someone does, I pointed out. Someone has to ensure we're actually making good wine, or there's nothing to market. That's what we have staff for, she said dismissively. People like Francis and the production team. You could still be involved in that part if you wanted. That was always the plan. You handling production, me handling the business side and the retreat. I stared at her, the pieces finally coming. Together. They told you that? That I'd still run production while you took over as CEO? She nodded. Of course. No one was trying to push you out completely, Emma. Just reposition you where your skills are most valuable. The audacity of it was almost breathtaking. They had planned to demote me to a glorified employee position, while handing Olivia the leadership role I'd spent years preparing for, and they'd presented it to her as a reasonable compromise. "And you believed them?" I asked, unable to keep the incredulity from my voice. "After watching how they've treated me all these years, you actually thought I'd happily step aside and work under you?" Olivia's expression hardened. "I thought you'd be professional enough to do what's best for the vineyard." "What's best for the vineyard?" I repeated slowly. "And you think that's you in charge? Despite having no winemaking experience, no industry relationships, and no real connection to this land?" "I have vision," she insisted. "I see possibilities you don't, ways to evolve beyond just making wine." "That's exactly the problem," I said, quietly. "This place isn't just a platform for your ambitions, Olivia. It's 3 generations of work, of knowledge, of commitment to creating something authentic and enduring. Grandpa didn't build it so you could turn it into a backdrop for social media influencers." Her cheeks flushed with anger. "That's unfair. My retreat concept would bring in a whole new clientele, create additional revenue streams. While using vineyard resources, reputation, and funds," I cut in. "Have you ever considered starting your own business from scratch? Building something yourself instead of co-opting what others have built?" The question hung between us, unanswered but revealing. Olivia stood abruptly, any pretense of reconciliation abandoned. "I came here hoping we could find some resolution," she said stiffly, "to prevent a family tragedy, but clearly you've made your choice." "Yes," I agreed, remaining seated. "I have, and tomorrow the board will make theirs." She turned to leave, then paused at the top of the steps. "You know they'll never forgive you for this. If you go through with tomorrow, there's no going back." I looked past her to the dark silhouettes of the vines, thinking about everything they represented, not just to me, but to everyone who had ever worked this land with care and respect. "Some things are worth losing family for," I said quietly. "Some principles can't be compromised, even for the people who raised you." Olivia shook her head, a mixture of frustration and something that might have been grudging respect crossing. Her face. "You always were the stubborn one." "I learned from Grandpa," I replied simply. After she drove away, I remained on the porch for a long time, sipping the wine that had been my grandfather's pride, replaying the conversation in my mind. Something had shifted inside me, a final letting go of any hope that my family might recognize the wrong they had done, might choose integrity over ambition, truth over convenience. They wouldn't. And somehow, accepting that fact freed me from the last vestiges of doubt about tomorrow's confrontation. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Marcus. "Olivia just left. She tried to talk me out of tomorrow. I'm more certain than ever that we're doing the right thing." His response came quickly. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we reclaim your grandfather's legacy." I looked out at the vineyard one last time before heading inside. Generations of Richardsons had tended these vines, but tomorrow would determine who would guide their future. Those who saw them as assets to be leveraged, or those who understood they were a trust to be honored. The choice seemed clearer than ever. The morning of the board meeting dawned clear and bright, the October sky a perfect Vermont blue. I had barely slept, but adrenaline kept me focused as I dressed in a simple charcoal suit, professional but understated, nothing like Olivia's designer wardrobes or my mother's carefully curated elegance. I was placing the last of my evidence, folders, into my briefcase when a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Francis standing on my porch, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, spreading across my small front yard, were at least 30 people: vineyard workers, cellar staff, lab technicians, office personnel, even some of the tasting room employees. "What is this?" I asked, stunned by the unexpected gathering. Francis smiled, the morning sun highlighting the deep creases earned from decades working under open skies. "We thought you might like some company on your walk to the board meeting." I stepped out onto the porch, overwhelmed by the sight of so many familiar faces. People I'd worked alongside for years, some I'd known since childhood. Eduardo, our vineyard manager, Sophia from the lab, Martha from accounting, the entire harvest crew, even Pete, the groundskeeper who rarely spoke to anyone. "You didn't all need to come," I said, my voice unexpectedly thick. "Yes, we did," Sophia replied firmly. "This isn't just your fight anymore, Emma. It's about what kind of place Richardson Vineyards is going to be." Martha nodded in agreement. "We've seen how you work, how you treat people, how you respect the land. And we've seen how your sister and parents operate. We know who we want leading this vineyard." I looked out at them. These people who had chosen to stand with me despite the risk to their livelihoods. The gesture was more meaningful than they could possibly know. Not just the support itself, but what it represented. They weren't here because I was a Richardson. They were here because of the relationship we had built, the mutual respect we had earned through years of working toward a common purpose. "Thank you," I said simply, knowing any more elaborate expression would fail to capture what I was feeling. Together, we walked the half-mile path from my cottage to the main administrative building where the board meeting would be held. We moved, in comfortable silence through the morning-cool vineyard, our footsteps crunching on gravel, the October sun warming our shoulders. A few workers in distant rows paused their tasks to wave or raise a fist in solidarity as we passed. As we approached the administration building, I could see my parents' cars already parked outside, along with Olivia's new SUV and several vehicles belonging to board members. A small knot of tension formed in my stomach, but the presence of my impromptu procession kept it from growing into full-blown anxiety. At the entrance to the building, I turned to address the group. "I can't ask you all to come inside. This is a closed board meeting, and I don't want anyone risking their position here." "We know," Francis said, "but we wanted you to see that you're not walking in there alone, and we wanted them to see it too." As if on cue, the large windows of the boardroom reflected movement. Faces appeared, looking out at the gathered crowd with expressions ranging from surprise to concern. My father's unmistakable silhouette stood rigid near the center window, his posture radiating tension even from a distance. Martha stepped forward, handing me one last folder. "We took up a collection," she said. "Personal statements from people who couldn't be here today. Seasonal workers, retired staff, even some long-term customers who've heard rumors about what's happening. Everyone who cares about this place and what it stands for." I accepted the folder, adding it to my briefcase with care. "Thank you all," I said again, looking around at the faces of people who had chosen principle over expediency, truth over comfortable silence. "Whatever happens in there today, I won't forget this." With a deep breath, I turned and walked the remaining distance to the entrance alone, though I could feel the collective support of the group at my back. As I reached for the door handle, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. They remained there, standing quietly but resolutely in the morning sun, a living reminder of what Richardson Vineyards truly was. Not just land and buildings and balance sheets, but a community of people bound together by shared purpose and mutual respect. Inside, the atmosphere in the reception area was charged with tension. The young receptionist, Julie, gave me a nervous smile as I signed in. "They're waiting for you in the boardroom," she said, then added in a whisper, "Good luck." The short walk down the hallway to the boardroom felt longer than usual, each step bringing me closer to a confrontation that would permanently alter the course of my life and the vineyard's future. I paused outside the heavy oak door, gathering my thoughts one final time. I thought of my grandfather, of the countless hours he'd spent teaching me everything he knew about winemaking, about business, about integrity. I thought of his weathered hands showing me how to prune a vine, his patient voice explaining fermentation chemistry, his quiet insistence that quality was never to be compromised. "The easy path isn't always the right one, Emma," he told me once. Sometimes you have, to stand alone for what matters. Except I wasn't standing alone, not anymore. With that thought firmly in mind, I opened the door and stepped into the boardroom. The long oak table was fully occupied. My parents at one end, Olivia beside them, the 8 board members arranged. On either side. Walter Simmons, as the senior board member, sat at the far end. Marcus was already seated near Walter, a reassuring presence amid so many uncertain allies. All conversation ceased the moment I entered. My father's expression was stone. My mother's carefully composed into neutral pleasantness that didn't reach. Her eyes. Olivia refused to look at me directly, studying her manicure with exaggerated interest. "Emma?" Walter greeted me, his voice warm despite the tension in the room. "Thank you for joining us. I believe we're ready to begin." I took my seat across from Marcus, setting my briefcase on the table with deliberate calm. "Before we start," my father said, his voice clipped, "I want to address the demonstration outside. Organizing vineyard staff to pressure this board is inappropriate and unprofessional." "I didn't organize anything," I replied evenly. "Those people came of their own accord, because they care about the future of this vineyard." "They're employees," my mother interjected smoothly. "Their job is to follow management directives, not to involve themselves in board matters." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.